right. We are going to look at DIE Must Die by Jordan Peterson. Now, we're going to challenge ourselves because it is a 18-minute video. And I'm notorious for taking 2 hours to go across 10-minute videos. So we will try and do our best to be good and not do
Hello,
that.
everyone.
Hello.
I wrote this article recently for one of Canada's major newspapers, the National Post. I'm reading it for those of you who would rather watch and listen. It's entitled, DIE Must Die. This is why. I recently resigned from my position as full tenured professor at the University of Toronto. I am now Professor Emeritus, and before I turned 60. Emeritus is generally a designation reserved for superannuated faculty, albeit those who had served their term with some distinction. I had envisioned teaching and researching at the U of T full-time until they had to haul my skeleton out of my office. I loved my job. And my students, undergraduates and graduates alike, were positively predisposed toward me. But that career path was not meant to be. There are many reasons, including the fact that I can now teach many more people and with less interference online. But here's a few more. First, my qualified and supremely trained heterosexual white male
Heterosexual white male
students, and I've had many others, by the way, are no longer eligible upon graduation for university research positions, despite stellar scientific dossiers. This is partly because of diversity, inclusivity, and equity mandates. My preferred acronym, DIE.
I contend that that is not correct, that they are not ineligible for it, but there are a few positions for them. Like, there are more people broadly applying for the positions because they've ensured that people outside of the white cis male, het male category actually have the ability to contend effectively for those positions. And so fewer white men are getting the jobs, but they're still competing for all the jobs. They're just, they've got more competition, which is good, right?
These have been imposed universally in academia, despite the fact that university hiring committees had already done everything reasonable for all the years of my career, and then some, to ensure that no qualified minority candidates were ever overlooked. My students are also partly unacceptable, precisely because they are my students.
Yes, because you are a reactionary piece of shit. So I would be very side-eye towards anyone who listed Jordan Peterson as a reference, or anyone that based their research around Jordan Peterson's ideas, because I think his ideas fundamentally misunderstand the concepts that they're seeking to understand. I think the good example of that is whenever I've seen him talk about diversity, he refers to diversity as it relates to the equity of outcome as opposed to the equity of starting conditions. And it's true that the discussion often gets confusing, and that often we'll refer to things like the Indigenous people in Australia, their outcomes are different to ours. For example, their expected lifespan is lower than non-Indigenous people. Their pay rates are lower than non-Indigenous people. Their incarceration and their likelihood of being in the justice system is higher than non-Indigenous people. And we look at that and we go, we want those things to be we don't want them to be a gap between those outcomes and the average population's outcomes. And so we seek to address that. And they look at those discussions and they assume that when we look at diversity in the workplace, what we're looking for is we need 50 men and 50 women, and we need exactly 1-to-1 ratio with the population in terms of all the different ethnicities out there. We need to make sure that there is a 10% of non-heterosexual people in the company. That's what they think diversity is about, and that's not the case. It's they're conflating the broad statistical census level outcomes and wanting those to be average, because when we talk about large numbers, we want averages to actually match each other. If we believe that people are equal in terms of their capability and their potential, if they have the correct material conditions, then if that's what we believe, that there is no difference between people based on races, and that the difference that we see is based on material conditions, we can address that and we can have that the broad outcomes are the same. That is different from saying this student who is this color from this university should have the same as this student who is a different race at the same university. They should both get the same job. That's not what we're saying. And the fact that he never contends with it in that manner, he never talks about it in that way, just tells me he's either ignorant or malicious in the way he's trying to prevent actual diversity and equity and inclusion. I think he misunderstands it. Maybe that's just because I want to be kind to him, though. I don't know.
I am academic persona non grata because of my unacceptable philosophy.
Because you pretended that the trans bill in Canada was about sending you to jail for misgendering someone, and it never fucking happened. That's why you're a pariah.
Positions. And this isn't just some inconvenience. These facts rendered my job morally untenable.
Good.
How can I accept prospective researchers and train them in good conscience, knowing their employment prospects to be minimal? Second reason.
So what this is this is like the soft influence of social pressure for when people do things or say things or believe things or work towards agendas that are not palatable to the rest of society, or to a large enough portion of society that they can actually start to feel that pressure for being transphobic, for being sexist, for being generally just a reactionary person who justifies not moving forward with diversity and inclusion. And I'm perfectly comfortable with that outcome occurring in, particularly in Jordan Peterson's case, because he has been on this racket for is it 2016 that he first became notorious for his positions? And since then, he has been on a non-stop, I want to say grift. Does grift mean? He's been on a non-stop grift. For him to sit up here, for him to come out and say, I've quit my job because it's morally untenable for me to participate in academia, well, he's incredibly relevant culturally. His voice is probably one of the most heard academic voices in the world because of the amount of time he gets on conservative platforms. This video is 1 day old, and it's already got 640,000 views, and yet he's complaining here tacitly that his voice is being muted because of the positions that he has, when it is in fact the opposite. He has been highlighted, accelerated, and magnified in terms of his reach because of his views. You just have to look at the outcomes. Like, what other professor, can we think of any professors or anyone in academia who speaks at the diametric opposite of Jordan Peterson about inclusion, about diversity, about equity, who gets just as much of a platform as Jordan Peterson does? I can't think of anyone. Now, your mileage might vary because you're been more in tune with these topics, but I think the fact that even people that don't know about this stuff, that aren't terminally online people, still have a good chance of knowing who Peterson is. Are we going to sit here and pretend that he's been silenced? Are we going to play along with this fantasy in his head that his influence in the world is being reduced because of cancel culture or wokeness? It's ridiculous.
This is one of many idiot issues of appalling ideology currently demolishing
I hate how he says ideology. It's not ideology, it's ideology.
The universities and downstream the general culture. Not least because there are simply not enough qualified BIPOC people in the pipeline. BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color.
I don't like the way he says black. It feels,
For those of you not in the knowing woke. This has been common knowledge among any remotely truthful academic who has served on a hiring committee for the last 3 decades. This means we're out to produce a generation of researchers utterly unqualified for the job.
Imagine saying that because they're going to be hiring more people, BIPOC people, that there's going to be a generation of unqualified people. Like, doesn't that vastly overestimate the level of competency that people are able to demonstrate in the interviewing process, as opposed to people's natural ability to learn things on the jobs? And it's not like these people are getting the jobs without the necessary qualifications. They're still getting the qualifications. They still have to pass the class. They still have to show that they're capable to get to the point where they can actually show up for the interviews. It's really disingenuous. And it's really, I mean, bigotry of low expectations, right? Isn't that something that they talk about sometimes? On the right.
And we've seen what that means already in the horrible grievance studies disciplines. That, combined with the death of objective testing, has compromised the university so badly that it can hardly be overstated. And what happens in the universities eventually colors everything, as we have discovered. All my craven colleagues must craft die statements to obtain a research grant. They all lie, excepting the minority of true believers. And they teach their students to do the same. And they do it constantly with various rationalizations and justifications.
That's actually really... I doubt that his colleagues lie in that sense. I assume that his colleagues just have a different ideology to him, and he's not acknowledging it, which is really inconsistent and really not operating the principle of charity, which not very academic of you, my friend.
Further corrupting what is already a stunningly corrupt enterprise. Some of my colleagues even allow themselves to undergo so-called anti-bias training conducted by supremely unqualified human resources personnel, lecturing inanely and blithely and in an accusatory manner about theoretically all-pervasive racist, sexist, heterosexist attitudes.
Heterosexist.
Such training is now often a precondition.
A lot of that training is bullshit. A lot of that training is pretty bad.
To occupy a faculty position on a hiring committee. Need I point out that implicit attitudes cannot, by the definitions generated by those who have made them a central point of our culture, be transformed by short-term explicit training? Assuming that those biases exist in the manner claimed, and that is a very weak claim. And I'm speaking scientifically here. The implicit association test, the much vaunted IAT, which purports to objectively diagnose implicit bias, that's automatic racism and the like, is by no means powerful enough, valid and reliable enough to do what it purports to do. Two of the original designers of that test, Anthony Greenwald and Brian Nozick, have said as much publicly. The third, Professor Mahzarin Banaji of Harvard, remains recalcitrant. Much of this can be attributed to her overtly leftist political agenda, as well as to her...
If we're going to look at people's overt agendas and base our judgment of whether or not they're accurate or objective in their diatribes, I think Jordan Peterson's on shaky ground because he is... has a very clear political agenda.
Her embeddedness within a subdiscipline of psychology, social psychology, so corrupt that it denied the existence of left-wing authoritarianism for 6 decades after World War II. The same social psychologists, broadly speaking, also casually regard conservatism, in the guise of system justification, as a form of psychopathology.
He published this in a newspaper. Let's think about that for a second. Like, this is not the... Peterson, when you write a piece for consumption, you need to consider the goal and the audience. The goal, I think it's pretty clear what your goal is, but what is also very clear is you've not considered your audience. You are citing studies and citing academic concerns without grounding them with an understanding that can be easily brought about to a lay person. So, for example, you talk about the implicit racism test, and that two of the people that created the test speak out against it, but you don't say why. You don't actually say, look, this actually doesn't work. It doesn't function as it's intended because of X, Y, Z. You just say it doesn't work, and you expect us to take that based on your academic authority, which, you already established is questionable because most people will sort of see you as a black mark in terms of working with you or having worked with you. So it really feels like all you're trying to do is create a lightning rod for people that already agree with you, so that this kicks off. And we're going to see this for weeks. This is going to be doing the cycle for a long time. And hey, maybe covering the video is hypocritical if I'm criticizing it for that, but we can know with absolute certainty that this is going to do the rounds on Ben Shapiro, on Crowder, on Fox News. It's going to be picked up by everyone. It strikes me as a bit of a stunt to resign and then complain about diversity requirements while taking away, one of the good ones, the cis white het men, right? But hey.
Banerjee's continued countenancing of the misuse of her research instrument, combined with the status of her position at Harvard, is a prime reason we all still suffer under the Dye yoke, with its baleful effect on what was...
I don't think the entirety of the recognition of diversity, inclusion, and equity in academia and also in the corporate worlds, I don't think all of that is hinging on this one study. It also probably is informed by the many studies that actually demonstrate quite clearly that diversity leads to innovation. Like when you have a team of people working on a problem and you have multiple different lived experiences represented there, you actually come up with more innovative, more out-of-the-box solutions. Like that's something that is demonstrated by studies fairly consistently, is my understanding. On top of that, the studies do also recognize that those conditions also lead to more friction as well. So we realize that while diversity is something that is a ethical good that we wish to aim for, we do also need to recognize that it is not just a net, like it is a net benefit, but it also introduces these other things we need to contend with, which can be the friction that occurs between people where there might be a slightly different lived experience where one doesn't understand quite where the other's coming from. And so that's part of why when we look at diversity, inclusion, and equity training, we do need to recognize that just because it is better and we recognize it's better doesn't mean it's always easy. It's easier to be a bigot, but it's better to be open-minded about other people's experiences. But not Jordan Peterson. Look at that face.
Once the closest we had ever come to truly meritorious selection. Furthermore, the accrediting board for grad clinical psych training programs in Canada are now planning to refuse to accredit university clinical programs unless they have a social justice orientation. That, combined with some recent legislative changes in Canada.
One of the problems is that I don't know, like he says social justice, and I don't know if that's the phrasing or the framing that's actually being used, or if that's him using his understanding of something that might be a lot more innocuous. There's been a couple of times on various streams where I've looked up the things that have been complained about, and it turns out like they're misrepresenting the situation through disingenuous framing, and it's just, I don't feel like fact-checking.
Claiming to outlaw so-called conversion therapy, but really making it exceedingly risky for clinicians to do anything ever but agree always and about everything with their clients.
I bet it's all about agreeing with the clients when their clients are like, hey, I'm gay, and not converting them through like abusive therapies, like shock therapy and shame and all sorts of other things.
Have likely doomed the practice of clinical psychology, which always depended entirely on trust and privacy. Similar moves are afoot in other professional disciplines, such as medicine and law. And if you don't think that psychologists, lawyers, and other professionals are anything but terrified of their now woke governing professional colleges, much to everyone's extreme detriment, you simply don't understand how far all of this has gone. Just exactly.
If he can tell us how far it's gone without saying, hey, they're banning conversion therapy, and I think that's bad, because that's not going to move me, I'll be honest. Like, if you come to me and say that clinical therapy is in danger because the Canadian government is making it illegal to undertake conversion therapy, you're not going to convince me of your position. I feel like some more examples, maybe around the lawyers as well, like, you know, the governing laws, that can be a very strong indicator of where the line in the sand is for the government, but we'll see if we get any of that.
Exactly what am I supposed to do when I meet a grad student or young professor hired on die grounds? Manifest instant skepticism regarding their professional ability? What a slap in the face to a truly meritorious outsider. And perhaps that's the point. The die ideology is not friend to peace and tolerance. It is absolutely and completely the enemy of competence and justice.
You know what's funny is, like, part of the entire presumption of his diatribe here is that before these die mandates come in, the process for hiring is 100% infallible based on the meritocracy. Yet there are studies, and now I do this myself, right? Like, my legal name is a name that is not common, and it is a name that signifies both non-whiteness and is also leans towards a feminine assumption. Grade 10, fantastic weekend. I went on a science camp and was traveling to Brisbane for the weekend to go to one of the universities and see what it was like to, study the sciences here, just to inform my choice in grade 11 and 12. But because my first name sounds like a feminine name, I was billeted with two sisters. It was fantastic. Unfortunately, I was a good Christian boy, so I didn't get up to anything. But hey, sounds like a good story, right? But my point is, like, we know, even till today, that the name that you put on your resume has an effect on the likeliness on whether or not you get a call back. Whether your name sounds male or female, white or non-white, those things have a negative impact. And that's why my first name on my resume is Sam. My second name on my resume is only half of my actual last name. Because, I just don't want to have to deal with the question of, did I not get a call back because, hey, that's just too much to deal with. I don't know. So the idea that this has all been a meritocracy up until now, and that we're going to put our thumb on the scale for the people that are non-white, non-het, non-male, and suddenly it's going to be unfair and out of whack, and people that don't deserve jobs are going to get the fucking jobs. Jordan Peterson has been living in a fucking dream world if he thinks that the only people that get jobs at the moment are the best people for the job, because I can tell you for a fact that currently in the system that we operate in the fucking day-to-day life that we go in out there, we all know, and I think anyone would accept, that one of the most common things that helps people get jobs is not their meritocracy, is not how good they are at the job, it's how good they are at interviewing. And that is why we have things like professional resume writing services. It's why we have interviewing coaches, because interviewers, panels, people that are hiring for positions are inherently shit at hiring for the job, and they hire for the interview. And that is why we are not in a meritocracy for this. And that is why DIE will not materially change how good people are at the jobs they get. But yeah, this is the hill that Peterson wants to die on. I guess it was a shame for him that he didn't get dragged into jail kicking and screaming for misgendering a trans person. So instead he's got, basically got to just throw himself on the fire. And, if no one's going to make a martyr of him, he'll make a martyr of himself.
And for those of you who think that I am overstating the case, or that this is something limited in some trivial sense to the university, consider some other examples.
Come on.
This report from Hollywood, cliched hotbed of liberal sentiment for...
a report from Hollywood. Hopefully he'll be a bit more specific about that than just a report from Hollywood.
For example,
Hey, Gary.
indicates just how far this has gone. In 2020, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the Oscar people, embarked on a 5-year plan. Does that ring any historical bells?
Holy shit.
Quote, diversify our organization and expand our definition of the best. They did so in an attempt which included developing, quote, new representation and inclusion standards for Oscars to, hypothetically, quote, better reflect the diversity of the movie-going audience.
What is wrong with that? What there doesn't make sense? I don't know how big the Oscar committee is for whoever determines who gets awards or not, but let's pretend there's 100 people that make that decision. That's probably too many. If that committee was 90% white, then we know already in our heads, right? We can think with our meat space that makeup of people does not reflect the makeup of the population around the world that watches movies. I don't know if the Oscars are meant to represent just the American market or whether they're meant to be like, the world, because I guess they had movies like Parasite and stuff. Obviously, they're not going to necessarily come to the same aggregate conclusion on what the best is that the population as a whole might, because they've not got the same sensibilities, they've not got the same cultural reference points, they might not have the same impact when it comes to different movies because they resonate with different things. All he's explained here is that the Oscars want to create a system in which they can better reflect the diversity of the public in their organization. And he wants to look at us and he wants to question about whether or not it is like some fucking conspiracy about the Nazis. Like, that's the 5-year plan he's referencing, right? And all it is literally making sure that they can better recognize talented people who express themselves in ways that are not necessarily recognized or understood by white people in the same way that their intended audience might understand it. It is batshit insanity.
What fruit has this initiative, offspring of the die ideology, borne? According to a recent article penned by...
Hopefully more techno-afro stories, because I think they've been really interesting to look at that sort of... Like Black Panther and stuff have been really interesting looks into a different version of futurism. I think that'd be fantastic, right? If they can get recognition for that, that means there's more likelihood those projects will go forward.
Peter Kiefer and Peter Savodnik, but posted on former New York Times journalist Barry Weiss's Common Sense website, and Weiss left the Times because of the intrusion of radical left ideology into that newspaper, just as Tara Henley did recently vis-a-vis the CBC.
I don't want to say what I was going to say. All you reactionaries are leaving jobs because you're uncomfortable there, because the vast majority of people don't want you there, and that is okay with
Quote, we spoke to more than 25 writers, directors, and producers, all of whom identify as liberal, and all of whom described a pervasive fear of running afoul of the new dogma. How to survive the revolution? By becoming its most ardent supporter. Suddenly, every conversation with every agent or head of content started with, is anyone BIPOC attached to this? And this is everywhere. And if you don't see it, your head is either in the sand or shoved somewhere far more unmentionable. CBS, for example, has literally mandated that every writer's room be at least 40% BIPOC in 2021, 50% in 2022.
They're pretty low numbers, right? Like relative to the actual proportion of population. Like, aren't white people like the minority? Let's say it's just in America, because I'm pretty sure that's it. That's the case. Oh no, sorry, that's my mistake. In 2020, non-Latino white, for some reason they lumped together Hispanic whites. That's probably just my ignorance as an Australian. As 57% of the population. That's bigger than I thought. I thought it was like 40%. Wasn't there like a big pushback where people were like, holy shit, we're actually the minority now. Can't we be victims too? Self-identified race. Why are you giving me a chart with no numbers? That's pointless. Anyway, this is beyond the point.
We are now at the point where race, ethnicity, gender, or sexual preference is first accepted as the fundamental characteristic defining each person, just as the radical leftists were hoping, and second is now treated...
I never know what they mean by radical leftists. Like, I never know. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean by the radical leftists want to democratize a workplace? Like, fucking hell.
As the most important qualification for study, research, and employment.
Not true. Not true. When I tick the do you have a disability part when I do a job application, it doesn't stop and go, great, thanks for that. We'll call you when we call you. I still need to do a resume. I still need to do a interview. I still need to do a reference check. It's crazy how that works, right?
Need I point out that this is insane?
You need to point out
Even
something.
Even the benighted New York Times has its doubts. A headline from August 11th, 2021. Are workplace diversity programs doing more harm than good? In a word, yes.
Look at his face.
Harm than good? In a word, yes.
Oh god, he's so angry, and he needs to tilt his webcam down a little bit more. There's too much space at the top of his head. It's really distracting me.
How can accusing your employees of racism, etc., sufficient to require retraining, particularly in relationship to those who are working in good faith to overcome whatever bias they might still, in these modern liberal times, manifest, be anything other than insulting, annoying, invasive, high-handed, moralizing, inappropriate, ill-considered, counterproductive, and otherwise unjustifiable? And if you think die is bad...
You know what's funny is, like, I actually think, like, the contention there is, like, you're talking down to your employees. You're treating your employees like they're bad people, like they're racist, and that's bad. Like, wouldn't it follow then that Jordan Peterson should have an issue with the way employees get treated in general, with the way that employees are abused, with the way that labor and time is stolen? Like, you know, you've got to clock in 15 minutes early, you've got to clock out before you leave for work for the day, or, you know, you clock out at 5:30 but you don't finish cleaning up until 6, and that's just your day to day. Or we don't have time for a lunch break today, so can you just keep working? Or can you come in on your day off because someone's called out sick, because we have our staffing levels so short that we actually need to essentially intrude on your personal life in order to keep our business running. And, you know, if you do that, you're considered a good worker, and we've made that a moral and ethical standard that people should be upheld to. None of that abuse of the workers is Jordan Peterson's issue. His issue is, like, you might be called racist, you might be called sexist. And I mean, I'm not saying it's not bad to be accused of, you know, being racist if you haven't engaged actively in something racist that they're calling out directly. Like, I'll still sit back with the belief that we all have racism embedded into us in some way, and it's just a matter of how much that we each individually accept and own up to that when we do accidentally, you know, falter, or when we're less than perfect, and when we go, oh shit, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I'll try to do better next time. I'll work on that, instead of indignantly going, no, that's just my honest opinion, and you can't cancel me for that. Like, one of these things is more mature than the other, and while Jordan Peterson has got me beat on the grey, I've still got a little bit of executive silver here to lend credence to my words, I think.
Bad. And it is.
Oh, another face.
And if you think die is bad, and it...
Oh, wait, this is...
It is wait until you get a load of environmental, social, and governance ESG scores. See the Vanguard website for more information. Purporting to assess
I can't type. Cobra Kai. I haven't seen Cobra Kai, so yeah. Wait, Vanguard Australia? Was he talking about an Australian thing? Wait, he's not talking about social economy work, is he? He is. Kind of. At least part of it. He's a fucking idiot.
corporate moral
We'll talk about that later.
responsibility. These scores, which can dramatically affect an enterprise's financial viability,
They do not.
are nothing.
They do not. I have had a short look at that, and I guarantee you that is incorrect. That this is actually a disruptive part of the sector when it comes to new enterprises and businesses. It is not actually something that's affecting major corporations.
Less than the equivalent of China's damnable social credit system.
Our credit system determines whether or not you can buy a house, whether you have shelter. Oops, we muted it.
Applied to the entrepreneurial and financial world. CEOs, what in the world is wrong with you? Can't
True.
you see that the ideologues
Give up
who
your money.
push such appalling nonsense are driven by an agenda that is not only absolutely antithetical to your free market enterprise as such, but precisely targeted at the freedoms that made your success possible?
Like the sexual abuse from Bobby Kotick at Activision, allegedly.
Can't you see that by going along sheep-like, just as the professors are doing, just as the artists and writers are doing, that you are generating a veritable fifth column within your businesses? Are you really so blind, cowed, and cowardly with all your so-called privilege?
So-called privilege.
And it's not just the universities.
There's millions
and
of
the
dollars,
professional
mate.
colleges,
So-called.
and Hollywood, and the corporate world. Diversity, inclusivity, and equity, that radical leftist trinity, is destroying us. Wondering about the divisiveness that is currently besetting
Divisive,
us?
not divisive.
Look no farther than die. Wondering more specifically about the attractiveness of Trump? Look no further than die. When does the left go too far? When they worship at the altar of die and insist that the rest of us, who mostly want to be left alone, do so as well. Enough already.
Oh, God.
Enough. Enough. Finally, do you know that Vladimir Putin himself is capitalizing on this woke
Russia's going to get you if you don't get rid of die. Vladimir Putin loves this woke ideology.
madness? Anna Majar Barducci at memri.org covered his recent speech. I quote from the article's translation. Putin speaking. The advocates of so-called social progress believe they are introducing humanity to some kind of a new and better consciousness. Godspeed, hoist the flags, as we say, go right ahead. The only thing that I want to say now is that their prescriptions are not new at all. It may come as a surprise to some people, but Russia has been there.
Why are we quoting Russia and Vladimir Putin as a source for see, I told you were wrong. Putin knows you're wrong, and I agree with Putin. Seriously? Is this the brain rot that we're at, where Putin is considered an evocative source for truth when it comes to social welfare Like, Russia's not exactly great on human rights. Yeah, we want to look at Putin and go, yes, Putin knows. Putin is aware. Russia's been through this, and so what Russia's doing is based on the knowledge of what the left does.
Already, after the 1917 revolution, the Bolsheviks, relying on the dogmas of Marx and Engels, also said that they would change existing ways and customs, and not just political and economic ones, but the very notion of human morality and the foundations of a healthy society. The destruction of age-old values, religion, and relations between people, up to and including the total rejection of family. We had that too. Encouragement to inform on loved ones. All this was
When is that? Where is any of that in the radical left? Right? It's not there, because if it was there, he would be talking about it specifically. Conservatives would be talking about it specifically, but they never go, here is exactly where the radical left is talking about informing on your relatives, on like disintegrating families. None of it's like that. None of it ever happens, and they will always performatively look at, well, this is what happened in Russia, this is what happened in wherever the fuck. But they never go, this is happening in America, this is happening in Australia, this is happening in the UK. It's always this arbitrary, well, this is the radical left agenda. The radical left agenda isn't even in power. We're not even in fucking power. It's the fucking center right and the right that's in power. That's it. It's all on you. If everything's going to shit, it's because of people that are mostly conservative, not that people that are mostly liberal or left-leaning. They don't have power. It is obscene. Like, look at the Build Back Better bill in fucking America. Look at, and you know, that was destroyed by the fact that two people in the radical left party didn't vote for it. And I tinfoil hat, but I am not convinced that their party couldn't have put more pressure on them if they wanted to get those votes. But hey, that's just me. And here in Australia, we have our radical left party of the Labor Party who are still making deals with coal mines and like all sorts of like. They want to blame the left. The left isn't in power, so fucking try again.
Proclaimed progress, and by the way, was widely supported around the world back then and was quite fashionable. Same as today. By the way, the Bolsheviks were absolutely intolerant of opinions other than theirs. Putin continues, "This, I believe, should call to mind some of what we are witnessing now. Looking at what is happening in a number of Western countries, we are amazed to see domestic practices, which we, fortunately, have left, I hope, in the distant past. The fight for equality and against discrimination has turned into aggressive dogmatism bordering on absurdity when the works of the great authors of the past, such as Shakespeare, are no longer taught at schools or universities because their ideas are believed to be backward."
Bullshit. 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 Bullshit.
The classics are declared backward and ignorant of the importance of gender and race. In Hollywood, memos are distributed about proper...
Like, that probably happened once with one teacher in one place, and that news story blew up, and that's now being cited as if that's the norm.
Storytelling and how many characters of what color or gender should be in a movie.
Usually, the discussions about particularly what color actors are is because when actors are playing a particular race that doesn't match with their own race, when there are actors of that race that could have fulfilled that role, that's, yeah. I think that's a fair concern, right? I still haven't seen Ghost in the Shell, partly because I was like, it doesn't feel like it's Major Motoko if it's Scarlett Johansson. And like, I wasn't angry about it, I didn't cancel it, I just was less interested because it wasn't accurate to what the source material was.
This is even worse than the Agitprop Department of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. End of Putin's comments.
Putin. We're quoting
this
Putin.
From the head of the former totalitarian enterprise, against whom we fought a 5 decades-long Cold War, risking the entire planet.
Do you think Putin might be actually like making public speeches, trying to feed into the culture war that these buffoons are fueling to sow more discord, and that he's actually playing into Putin's hands by like quoting Putin like earnestly? Like, just fucking ignore him. Make your point based on the cultural West and a million times more informative.
A very real manner. This from the head of a country riven in a literally genocidal manner by ideas that Putin himself attributes to the progressives in the West, to the generally accepting audience of his once burned, once, twice shy listeners. And all of you going along with the die activists, whatever your reasons. This is on you.
I missed it.
Professors, cowering cravenly in pretense and silence, teaching your students to dissimulate and lie, to get along. As the walls crumble, for shame.
God, I hope he's angry. I hope he's seething.
Signaling a virtue
I hope he
you
can't
don't
sleep
possess
because he's just
and
wound
shouldn't
himself up
want
so much.
to please a minority who literally live by displeasure.
I am happy with your displeasure, Jordan. That's tasty.
Evil capitalists, after all, should be proud of it. At the moment, I can't tell if you're more reprehensibly timid even than the professors. Why the hell don't you banish the human resource die upstarts back to the more appropriately named personnel departments, stop them from interfering with the psyches of you and your employees, and be done with it? Musicians, artists, writers, stop bending your sacred and meritorious art to the demands of the propagandists before you fatally betray the spirit of your own intuition. Stop censoring your thought. Stop saying you will hire for your orchestral and theatrical productions for any reason other than talent and excellence. That's all you have. That's all any of us have. He who sows the wind will reap the whirlwind. And the wind is rising.
Okay, I assume that's a quote from somewhere. I don't understand what it means in the context. And I don't understand the intention. He who sows the wind reaps the whirlwind. Oh, that was it.
Hello, everyone.
Shut up. Shut up. Well, Peterson's pretty mad. He's pretty stupid, but he's pretty mad. So I didn't get anything out of that because I'm a dumb radical lefty. I think the premise is flawed at its face, that diversity, inclusion, and equity work that's being done, while it can be misguided and it can be misapplied, is still an important goal that we should strive for. And if I have seen it done poorly in the past, I don't think it means that the goal of diversity in all parts of our life is negative. I think he basically misrepresents, whether intentionally or through ignorance, the goals of diversity, as in it is purely about getting people with different colored skin into different parts of the workforce and academia and the arts, as opposed to it recognizing that there is an inherent quality in the benefit that is brought out from diversity, like actually having more people representing more experience, representing more ways of thinking, will actually create and stimulate all those areas of our social life. So it's actually, because it's a net benefit, it's because the way we measure merit and the way we measure suitability for jobs is inherently biased towards people that look and sound like us. Because if we have someone that comes up to me saying that they want to work for me, and they come from Harvey Bay, and they, let's say they've got a little bit of Islander mixed in them, and they speak like me, and they grew up playing the same games, I'm inherently going to be biased towards them, because even if we don't talk about any of those things specifically, we're going to have shared experiences and references in the way we conduct ourselves, and unconsciously mirroring behaviors that we recognize and that make us feel at ease. And so he's more likely to get a job from me than someone that comes in that has maybe come from a different country, that maybe expresses their gender in a way that is non-normative like me. Like, I'm pretty standard in the way that I express myself in that part of my identity. I'm going to have a harder time understanding the cues and signals there. And so they're going to be at an inherent disadvantage. And that's because I, within myself, don't have diversity. And so because we can't do that as individuals, we need to do that as organizations, as groups, as, broad categories in society. And that's why the Oscars look at saying, hey, our organization is not diverse. And so we want to increase the diversity so we can start to recognize excellence and the best in whatever format it is, because we can't just do it from one point of view. And that's essentially what it is. If you have an organization that is just one type of person, or predominantly one type of person when it comes to demographics, then you will miss opportunities, you will miss solutions to problems that you might be struggling with, you will miss profits. Like, this is why, like, he asked the question why particularly capitalists, CEOs, are bowing down to this. It is because no CEO, no company does anything without profit underpinning the results from doing that thing. And so sometimes they do it because it's performative and because it gets them good press, and so their stock market value goes up, and so that's good for their stockholders. Sometimes they do it because legitimately it leads to more sales. Sometimes they do it because they're worried about the backlash if they're perceived as being racist or misogynistic or whatever. But they do it because there's a profit motive, because there's an advantage to it. But Jordan Peterson doesn't talk about any of that. He never talks about any of that. And to me, that is one of the strongest evidences that you can get from someone on how good their actual argument, their framework is for their position. It is whether or not they can bring to you and put in front of your face the strongest argument that debunks their position and explain to you why it's wrong. All he ever does is he misrepresents, misinterprets, and misreports on things that he believes prop up his position, and then tells you why you're evil, why you're lazy, why you're a coward for cowering down to people that disagree with him. Peterson, you've lost, at least in the academic terms. You have martyred yourself in exchange, I believe, for cultural relevance. And I think that's going to be a mine that you go back to again and again over the next couple of years. This is probably going to be a watershed moment for Peterson, in that this is where he will come back again and again and again to get legitimacy when he starts doing the conservative rounds, when he continues his grift as a reactionary, trying to convince us all that the radical left, who wants people to be recognized for their identities, not just as people, but for the identities that they use to express their experiences, for people that want that recognition, he's going to continually come back here to tell us why that's not relevant and not important. Very easy for a white man to argue about, we shouldn't have to worry about the color of our skin, because the default experience, the default expectation, the default for anything is white man. We need modifiers when it comes to iconology, signs in texts to show other identities. And that's what we're trying to achieve, is actually making those things a little bit more normalized. Yet here we are with Peterson saying, I'm going to quit over that. I'm going to throw it all away, and then I'm going to put out this vicious, toxic diatribe calling out everyone who has values that are opposite to mine. And then he is going to complain. This is going to be Jordan Peterson's I got cancelled effectively, so I quit my job because they're trying to silence me. And you know what? He's going to be on the biggest platforms on YouTube. He's going to go on the biggest platforms on mainstream media. He's sitting here with 640,000 views on YouTube. He's not cancelled in any meaningful way. He is simply, able to state his opinion. And he's going to make money for it. Money, money, money.